The conversation we're going to have is one that can be triggering. We're going to approach it in I'm just going to say in an approachable way. However, if you're feeling uncomfortable, if there's something, please feel free to just get up, go. If you need to ground yourself, and then come back. No one's going to think anything of it. You do what you need to do to take care of yourself. We also do have 2 peer supporters here from Voice Found. And if I could just, you ladies can raise your hand. We have Grail and Robin, who will be here and can meet with you afterwards. And actually afterwards, if you want to learn more about the programs that we offer with peer support, they're great resources. So that's the trigger warning. And I also just wanted to mention a few things before we get started, and that is, the whole topic of conversation this evening is trauma. And we're taking the approach of looking at it through the lens of people who've experienced childhood sexual abuse and exploitation. But I think every one of us has had a little bit of trauma at some point in our life. And what this conversation is going to do is just help you to understand the impact of this crime, which sadly is significant. The statistics are horrible. It remains a topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about. It makes them uncomfortable. I get that. But that silence is not serving anybody but the perpetrators of the crime. So we want to make this an approachable conversation so that we can all look after our neighbors. It takes a community. It takes a community to heal. It takes a community to reduce the incidence of sexual abuse. And I'm just so grateful to all of you for being here this evening. Shortly I'm going to call the panel up. We're going to do a panel discussion, depending on the timing, around 6-ish. We will leave time for some questions and answers. If you haven't already done so, please grab food. There's a lot of food, and you can eat. Nobody on the panel is going to be offended if you're eating while they're talking. Otherwise, my goodness, we're going to have to carry all those home. So please, feel free to do that. Washrooms are down where you came in. And with that, I am going to introduce our moderator, first of all, Derek Fage, and welcome Derek to the stage. Thanks. So Derek and I have done a number of events together and shared a lot along the way, and I'm grateful to have him moderating this panel. He is, well, you'll see, he's really an excellent moderator, and we'll make this a good conversation. So I'm just going to ask our panelists to come up. We have Carrie. They'll introduce themselves after. So Carrie, Keith, Marita. I'm always getting hers wrong. It's awful. Keith, Francois. No, are we missing anybody? No, look at that. Stacy, and I'm just going to hand my mic off, and I'm going to go sit down, and I'll talk to y'all later. Thank you.
Here we go. Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? I'll just do quick introductions here. I get the light off my face? I don't know. I'll have to see if somebody else can do that. That's not in my wheelhouse, I don't think. I'll just do a quick introduction of each of our panelists here, and then we'll get our conversation going. Just a reminder, as Cynthia mentioned, this can be triggering. So if you need to get up and you need to leave, feel free, be comfortable doing that. You're in a very safe space here with us here this afternoon. Stacy, I've met on a few occasions. We've done panels together. Actually, Cynthia and Stacy were just on my show on last Friday, and had a great conversation with the two of them. Stacy herself is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and she's also a registered psychiatrist. Welcome, great to have you here. Marita is a registered nurse and a sexual health educator. Thank you, Marita, for being here as well. Carrie is a nurse practitioner with Voice Found. Carrie, nice to see you. Keith, I'm sure many of you recognize Keith from his previous job as city councillor, but he's also a survivor himself, and he is the chair of the Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Ottawa board. And lastly, Francois, a registered psychiatrist as well. And I will tell you, we've had some great back and forth on email to make sure that we get out some of the conversation that each one of these panelists have. I always conduct these panels as a conversation, so I'll just remind all of our panelists, if you want to jump in during a conversation, feel free to do so. I think it's probably appropriate to talk with one of our survivors to kick off this discussion. And Stacy, I'll start with you. And again, we're not going into details of anything. We're talking more about how the abuse affected them. So I'll start with you, Stacy, and you can share with everybody a little bit about your story.
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is, while I love the promotion, Francois and I are psychotherapists.
Psychotherapists, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I should write that stuff down.
No, that's okay. We just want to make
Just take the promotion next time and don't embarrass me.
We have to charge a whole lot more.
Oh, right, yeah.
But, so my story, I was, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. It occurred very subtly when I was young, and then, my grandfather who groomed me, and the abuse was much more subtle, but then it also left me very vulnerable to later abuse by my mom's boyfriend. And so, that grooming meant that I was ripe for any predator out there, and it's been difficult, and it's been a lifelong journey of kind of not overcoming it, managing the trauma. Trauma, for me, is almost like a chronic health condition that I have to manage.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you, Keith, because I think there's a lot of people that go through trauma and they weren't necessarily aware of what they were experiencing, whether that was a mental or physical thing to themselves. You have an interesting story, but because you felt it physically, not only mentally. Can you just explain that to us?
Yeah, sure. So I was quite young when I was abused, and I was abused by someone that you're supposed to trust, and that was the parish priest. As a small child, I didn't really have the tools to deal with it. So what I did, what my brain, my body did, was just to shelve it, put it away, try and make me forget about it, which was effective in some ways because that I didn't rediscover it, if you will, or remember it until I was an adult. But in the intervening years, I had chronic pain. I had chronic pelvic pain. I still have it, and I went to numerous doctors and physiotherapists and specialists, and nobody could figure out why I had this pain. They tried different therapies or gave me different medications, and nothing seemed to work. And it was extremely frustrating. I was kind of at the end of my rope, and then I had an experience during a physiotherapy session where suddenly all the memories just came back, and I basically broke down on the physiotherapy table, and as everything just kind of flooded back to me, so yeah, the body doesn't forget it holds on to it, and it tries to compensate for it, but it does impact your mental health, but in many cases like mine, it impacts your physical health as well.
Marita, as a sexual health educator, I wonder, when it comes to finally getting therapy, and you can jump on this as well, Francois, but in different stages of your life, I imagine you need different people. I mean, it's not easy to find somebody that can help you out. In your experience, do you find that it in different stages of life that you have to find different people to help you at certain times?
Mm-hmm. Did you have anything to add to that first? Yeah.
Well, you can answer first, and then Francois can jump in if you like. Yeah.
No, I went through a whole series of things. I saw, a psychologist, and that was helpful, but it wasn't enough. And then I found Voice Found, and I have to give a shout out. I don't know where she's hiding, but I found Lucy, and that was the next level for me. That was the next stage, and I love Lucy.
Sounds like a great show.
It was the right thing for me. That was the next type of therapy, and right now, personally, what I'm trying to do is I'm working very hard at forgiving myself, for having my adult self forgive my child self for not telling someone, for not doing something, because if you can't get comfortable with yourself, and it's, as Stacy said, it's a lifelong challenge to work with it, but that's what I'm working at now, and trying to come to peace with what happened to me and who I am as a result of it.
Yeah, and that's where I was going, Marita, just as a sexual health educator, when you're explaining to somebody and talking to people, young people in particular, are you hearing the same type of emotion and mental and physical experience?
Yeah. So what I hear is someone who has found a lot of healing, and thank you for sharing that, which is wonderful, but I'm also hearing that it took a long, long time. And it took until he was an adult, until he was able to find some providers and specialists who could support. And so I'm glad you asked that question about with the education framing, because what we need to start doing is having these conversations more in earlier in the process. So as educators, as parents, as caregivers, as aunts and uncles and family members, we have to start thinking about why these conversations are so uncomfortable, and find ways to make them less uncomfortable. So for a lot of us, we grew up in homes where even just talking about sex was really, really uncomfortable or impossible, right? And so this is where the conversation starts, where we teach young children that they have autonomy over their bodies, give them language for what their body parts are. Let them know that their bodies belong to them and that they're in charge of their bodies, and be an adult that is okay with talking about things that are difficult. Kids can sense really, really quickly when we're uncomfortable with something, and they often will throw out little pieces of information to indicate that something is off. And if they receive discomfort from an adult, that's a message that this isn't a topic we can talk about. So there's a lot more to say, but.
Yeah, no, well said. Francois, something you sent, I mentioned to the audience that we had a few back and forths in email, and something that you sent along really struck me, and that is that many of those survivors, or many of those that are going through childhood sexual abuse during that period of time, they're still getting many of the needs, right, that they need at that point in life. Could you just explain that, what you mean by that, and to our audience?
Yeah, I think what's hard about this particular type of trauma is how everything is connected, right? So it's like, oh, part trauma, but also you're getting love, and also you're getting attention, and all this like stuff. And we talk about grooming. Thanks for bringing that up, Stacey, because I think it's such a potent part of the experience. And it's like, hey, it's hard enough to grow up, to have like a sexual awakening and all this stuff, but when all this gets like truncated early in childhood, it makes things so like insidious, because it happens like throughout all of your entire history as you're growing up. And by the way, thanks everybody for being here. Like, to talk about how it's difficult to have this conversation. I can post like a random picture of a cat on my Facebook post and get about 50, 60 likes. And I posted this, and I got 5. One of them was me. So it's obviously
great
something
point.
that makes people uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, yeah. Carrie, I'll go over to you. I mean, being a registered nurse with Voice Found, you hear stories like Stacy's and Keith's. When you hear about the grooming process, and this is something that can be so incredibly subtle, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about that, and because we want people to leave here with some takeaways, right, of what they should be looking for, what kind of behavior they should be looking for.
Yeah, and I think most of the clients that come to me are already past that stage, but a lot of times I do education for med students or different community organizations that are looking for the signs of grooming. So it can be so subtle, and my clients often say, like, he was just really nice to me, and he wanted me to get my nails done, and we hung out and we had a great time, but quickly it changed. And that's when they look for these red flags, often with their human trafficking survivors, and they see like they want something else back from them. And that's when the uneasiness started with them. Sometimes they had parents and supports, and sometimes they didn't. So a lot of the times the clients say, why didn't someone else notice? So I think the answer is people don't know. People don't expect it. It's close to home. So there's no blame there. It's just, let's get the education out. Let's teach more people what to look for. Why is that relationship? Why does that little person look a bit scared, a bit worried? Let's have some conversations. And you don't need to pull out the big guns or anything. You just need to make a connection, gain that person's trust so that they have someone they can talk to eventually when they're ready.
Yeah, go ahead, Francois.
And I think that you bring up such an important point, because there's the act and what it's like going through that, and then there's a whole re-traumatization that takes place once you start to dissect it, right? So here we are, and it's like, growing up, I talked about like difficulties of like just growing up with like a strong sexual health, but from an ego structure perspective, like this sense of self-worth, right? Like, and it's like, oh, like I get boosted by the grooming, I get boosted by all these things, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, like that's not, like they weren't interested in me as a human being or me as a person or me as a kid. I was just being used for my body, right? So that'll create like confusion around our own sense of self, our own sense of confidence, and like creates some challenging ego.
Yeah, because I think just touching on that, Francois, I think that there's then there's the self-isolation, and then there's the self-hate that comes into that. And Stacey, you're nodding your head. So honestly, I imagine you went through that yourself.
Yeah, the self-isolation is interesting, and I hadn't actually thought about it until right now, where like, I kind of think of, there's the sexual abuse, but then there's the symptoms afterwards. So if it stops, or even if it's continuing, but you're a teenager and now you are making some of your own decisions, and those decisions are not a reflection of who you are, but a reflection of what happened to you. And so, I made a lot of very poor decisions as a teenager, and we see it. We see the addictions. We see the promiscuity. We all of these things. That's not who we are. That's a symptom of what happened to us. And the isolation was interesting because one of my physical symptoms was migraines, and they do run in my family, but not as bad as I had them. And I ended up getting them bad enough and not wanting to face the school and face dealing with it, that I ended up at home, like getting tutored at home. I guess it'd be online now, but
Yeah.
but I missed half of grade 10 and half of grade 12 because of that. And because of that, I lost a lot of friends. And that isolation was way easier than dealing with it. And I tried to tell people. I tried to disclose. Carrie, you mentioned, you kind of tell people just a little bit and see how they react. And if you don't get what you need, you kind of just shut down.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
It just makes me think during those stages, the 4-year-old that isn't sitting at school and isn't paying attention, What are we missing? The 7-year-old that's starting to, wet her bed at night or having other symptoms. What are we missing? The teenager with migraines, and maybe they go to the doctor. Oh, they have anxiety. Oh, they need to get off their screens. Oh, and these little patchwork diagnoses, and then they come to us at 18. They have a myriad of diagnoses where no one said, you know what? This is from that complex trauma that happened. These are all your coping behaviors, and thank you, they've been great, but we don't need them anymore. So that's when, I think we got to stop looking at, always have a trauma lens on when we're looking at people to see really what's going on.
Francois, you're nodding your head, and I'm guessing you see that a lot, right? Where somebody has been struggling to find the right therapy for themselves, and there's drugs available, and certain therapists have different skills and so forth, and not really finding the root of the problem. Is that quite common of what you see?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of diagnoses that are really popular these days, right? And we see these fads occur throughout history, and things like ADHD, things like ASD, or all kinds of different anxiety, depression. All these are big, powerful words, and we have unfortunately often leaned on medication to be able to treat a lot of these things. And so often these are actually symptomatic of a deeper complex trauma, right? So, when we talk about this stuff, and I also want to quickly, when Cynthia was talking earlier around hey, we all face trauma, right? There's something so important about understanding that the trauma makes you different but the same, right? So because we're all humans, we all want the same things, love, life, all this great stuff that happens, right? And so I'm always tricky when we're talking about diagnoses or when we're talking about these particular boxes that we can fit people in, to understand that we can talk in generalities around this stuff, but we're also talking about unique individuals that go through their own process. And there's lots of different access points to what this looks like. But obviously not everybody with anxiety is suffering from a trauma, and it's important to not just oh, you have this, give me the pill, and I'm moving on, right? Yeah. Being able to understand yourself, understand the body, understand the emotion, understand your thoughts, understand your own developmental history, to be able to come to that root is really important, and because it's so deeply rooted in all these different facets of humanity.
Sorry, go ahead, Keith, yeah?
Just wanted to pick up on something. I can't remember who had said it, but it was you actually. The 4-year-old that's not doing well in class, or the 7-year-old. One of the things that I've had to contend with is, by the time it resurfaced for me, both of my parents had passed away. So I was never able to have that conversation with them and say, why didn't you see this? What did you miss? And so for me, it's a lot of filling in the blanks. You like to think, well, your parents would have done the right thing. They would have, and again, for me, I think one of the complicating factors was the fact of who did it to me. It was a person who was held in high esteem at that point. This is back in the 60s, before we were really talking about this and seeing what was happening in the Catholic Church. And to the questions about grooming, I was made the youngest altar boy in the parish, and I was given a rosary that was apparently blessed by the Pope, and I was, if there was an opportunity to make a little bit of money by being the extra server at a wedding or something, I got the first call, and I'd be rewarded by going out and getting an ice cream sundae or something, Now we'd say, what the hell, right? This isn't right. So that's a conversation, Derek, that would have liked to have had with my parents, to find out what, did they ever think maybe something wasn't quite right? But I'm never going to have that opportunity, so it's always going to be a bit of a blank for me.
Yeah.
But as I say now, I'm just looking at the faces as I say these things. Everybody's would be saying, that's not right. There's something happening here that shouldn't be happening. But hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah, and on an education side of things, Marita, just as Keith's talking, on the flip side, if you do see that something that's not right, I think a lot of people find it very difficult to approach that person, or whether it's the victim or the person that's doing the victimizing. What is the approach? What do we tell people to do?
Yeah, so it's a really big question because every situation is so very different. And so the answer is going to be very different for a 4-year-old that you have concerns about versus a teenager. But so there's a few things with small children. It's really important to understand a little bit about what's going on, but to be careful how we ask questions, because when kids are little, they learn by us asking questions, and then they tell us the answer until they get it right, and they tell us kind of what they think we want to hear. So we want to make sure that questions are really, really open-ended when we're talking to young children. When we're thinking about older youth or older children, I think one of the biggest things is to allow them a chance to tell whatever they're going to tell you, and let them know that they're safe, and that like I was mentioning before, that your level of discomfort is not going to be part of the picture. And that can be really, really, really difficult for a parent that's really worried about a child, or you have a good friend that you're really worried that they're in a relationship that's really unhealthy for them. If we're bringing a lot of our own discomfort and distress to it, that's going to shut them down. It's going to be about us, and it's not going to be about them. And so I had a call last night from a family member who said, I have this friend in a situation, I don't know what to do. And I was able to sort of help walk him through some ideas of what he could do for that person before he went to show up to that situation. So knowing what resources are available to you is a really important thing. You can talk to any of us here if you want to know more about resources that are available, but knowing a few numbers to call. The Ontario Network of Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Treatment Centres is a really great resource. There's 37 centres across the province, and there's a 24/7 navigation line. If you want a card for that, I'm happy to give you a card after. But that's a 24/7 line that you can call to talk to a sexual assault nurse. And they can give you some tips and advice and resources to offer someone. So getting a little bit educated and resourced first, I think, is a really good step.
And people, Carrie, are... They don't want to approach it for certain reasons. I mean, we've seen sexual assault cases one after the other, where nothing comes from it. It's incredibly frustrating. But I'd like to talk about the importance of, you hear those stories, but it's still important to report these, right?
Yes. That's tricky. A couple people even this week are so scared to report something actually today because their partner has threatened them and has a weapon. And where do we go from there, right? And the police, there is a unit with the police for our clients that can take care of that. There's some, witness protection available, but can we 100% guarantee that? Maybe not. So maybe that's not the time to be coming forward with that, and that's the time to build trust, to help the client where they're at, to help them get away, because they're usually back and forth in this relationship. I'm thinking more of my 20-year-old, 15-year-old girls. So it really depends. And when you talk about who to tell, it's usually someone you trust. So really building that trust up is so healing. And, as much as people can be, have the best medication that will help the symptom, give you all the explanations of why you feel this way, some of the best care they'll ever get is their case managers, caseworkers, their peers, someone that's been through that. We have a peer worker that I'm like, you don't need me, you need the peer worker, because she can talk to you and she can really help figure out what you need next and give that wraparound care. So yeah.
Francois, you wanted to jump in. Sorry, go ahead.
No, these are all important points, and I love all these resources. And I just want to do a quick shout to the bystander effect. So the bystander effect is a real problem within this community because of how uncomfortable this subject is, right? So please, everybody in this room, dare to have that conversation.
you know, when you finally decide to tell someone, I want to jump over to you, Stacey, because you finally decided to tell someone. I mean, there's this great fear of I'm going to tell somebody, and what is the response going to be? What was your situation like?
When I finally did, so I wrote a letter to my mom. My poor mom got this 3-page letter that I left for her because she had not been able to hear it before that, and I suspect she had a lot of her own trauma. And I didn't want anybody else to know about it. I needed her to understand why I didn't want to spend time with this person. It's like, yeah, no, I'm not being a rebellious teenager who doesn't appreciate everything this person does for me. I just need you to understand why. But I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to disrupt the family, nothing like that. And unfortunately, my mom felt the need to confront the person, which I understand. But then it got transferred to my grandmother, who then gave it to my family doctor. And I showed up at an appointment that I didn't know was going to happen, where my family doctor's got this very private letter. And I'm just like, oh my God. Now, it did ultimately, he referred me. I got a little bit of therapy, you know, at that time, which I was lucky to get through family services. And, you know, that's an important point too, is family services had free therapy. We couldn't afford it back then. So many people don't have access to these things. So like Voice Found is such an amazing resource because we are funded and we provide all of these services to people. And Strength Found in particular, which Lucy runs and is, you know, Cynthia has wanted to start for, well, probably well over a decade. And it's a peer support program. So, you know, we were talking about peers. When you can get into this group, we have these cohorts that go through a 14, 15-week program that you get to talk to others who have experienced what you've experienced. And that's so, so important because they understand. You don't have to explain. As I walked in today, I had a thing come up today and it just, you know, triggered some emotions. Not a big thing. But I was talking to our peer supporters. I'm like, oh my God, why am I feeling like this? And they're like, yeah, we get it. I didn't have to go any further. That's what you get from the peer supporters. Not to mention all of the kind of educational aspects, the boundaries and the, you know, learning all the things you need to learn about yourself so that you can move forward.
You know, Carrie, you know, what was interesting, you know, mentioning peer support, when Cynthia and Stacey came on the show, Cynthia said to me, we have ethical peer support. And it kind of took me back. I said, well, I've never heard anyone describe it as ethical before. Like whenever anyone comes on my show over 20 years, peer support is peer support. Why did she use the word ethical peer support?
Well, I think there's a lot of organizations that offer peer support, but you have to be trained. You have to know what you're doing, be able to listen to the stories, the trauma, and be able to work with it. So it's not just, hey, I've been there too. It's,
right.
I know what to do. I'm able to help you, and we have the training to be able to work through things together. Yeah.
Keith, I just would like to get your perspective just from what Stacey was talking about and finally telling someone. Can you walk us through your story?
Sure. I did it somewhat differently. So I was an elected official for 12 years, and I liked my job, and I needed people's support to keep that job. And I honestly didn't know what people's response would be if I told my story. So that's something that went back and forth in my head for several years. As to, you know, obviously my family knew, and some very close friends I told about, but I hadn't shared it in any kind of a broad way. And then I decided I wasn't going to run again for a whole lot of other reasons. And I then, you know, sat down and I spoke to my wife, Kristen, who's here today, who's just amazing, and so supportive. And I said, I think I'm going to call the press. I think I still have a bit of a platform. I'm not elected anymore, but some people know who I am. And more people need to know about what's available. More people need to know that there is support out there. So I wrote an op-ed for The Citizen a year ago and just put it right out there. And the response was quite overwhelming. And Lucy and I talked that day, and because I said, like, all these people want to know what they should do. What do I tell them? I don't know what to tell them. And so we, I ended up referring them to Voice Found and other organizations to deal with it. But give me just a couple more seconds. So something happened to me just a few weeks ago. I was at the library, and a woman came up to me and said, "Are you Keith?" And I said, "Yes, I'm Keith." And I'm immediately thinking this is probably a constituent, and maybe I didn't do something they wanted me to do when I was in office. But she said, I read your story in the paper, and she said, "You have such a wonderful family. You have such a supportive family." So I said, "Well, thank you. I do, and I appreciate them." And then she started to cry and said it again. And, well, she didn't come out to say it. I think what was going on is she told someone, and they didn't believe her. They didn't take it seriously. So I stayed with her. She cried a lot more, and I told her about different supports that were out there, and not really knowing what else to do except just to be with her. But that's all in a way of saying, if someone does tell you, believe them. People don't make this up. And whether you find it hard to accept because Uncle Fred would never do that, or the parish priest would never do that, or the teacher or the hockey coach, believe them. Because to get to the point, as Stacy said, to be able to say it, to be able to tell anyone, that's a long time coming. And you're putting everything out there and you don't know what the reaction is going to be. So the worst thing that can happen to that person, I think, is for someone to say they don't believe you, or why would you say such a thing? So if someone does come forward, just keep in mind how hard it is for them to have got to that point. And again, I have to thank my wife and my kids. There was never any doubt in their minds when I told them, and they were immediately supportive. And just a shameless plug for Voice Found, there is a program for partners and spouses of people who have been abused. And I think I can share, Kristen went through that program, and it's also very, very helpful, because it's not just about you, it's about the people around you, and Voice Found is a full wraparound service to help you and also to help your loved ones.
Go ahead, Sam.
I think it's interesting because I think of my disclosure, and it was this evolution, and I ended up writing a memoir about mine. And initially when I started telling people, it was I wanted somebody to know. Like, I didn't know what to do, but I wanted somebody to know because maybe they could help. And then later, I wanted people to understand me because, again, all this guilt and shame about all the things that happened afterwards. And then ultimately, when, I wrote the book, and that was therapeutic, couple of year process, and I put it out there, and I remember the day I hit publish kind of thing, and it's on Amazon and everything, and I was like, but this weight lifted because I wanted other people to know they're not alone. The details and the who and such is going to be different for everybody, but you're not alone, and that was important.
I don't know who wants to answer this, but I just, something just dawned on me. You think about, what, Keith describing, telling his family, and Stacy describing telling her family. How overwhelming must it be for someone to think they're about to destroy their family, right? I mean, that must be something that comes to people's minds that keeps them from exposing this, what's happened to them. Does anyone want to touch on that and just talk about, like how do you overcome that fear?
Yeah, I think that understanding that nobody's actually an island, right? Like we're all part of these systems, whether it be at school or at home and family. And these are big subjects that are going to affect you at a very young age, or depending when you decide to do this disclosure. And I think it's really important to understand that, like, it's not just once, right? Like, every time you disclose, it's going to have a reaction, right? So every new relationship, every new time, anytime this stuff comes up at work or whatever, there's this like fear as we sit here today, and there's like, this is a new iteration of like outing, right, that takes place. And there's this fear that like, oh, what does this mean about judgment, right? And I remember being in high school, and like I hadn't come out to this group of friends about this yet. And for me, they were talking about Theo Fleury at the time, who was, has a history of CSA. And like all the boys in my classroom were saying like, oh, like how disgusting, what does that mean? You know, like, oh, they're all gay, they're all this, they're all that. And it's like, oh my God, like meanwhile, like what does that mean about me in a time where I'm in this like self-definition thing, right? So all those things like make it really, really hard to disclose your story, for sure.
I want to talk about, sort of that you start abusing yourself quite often when you're in this kind of position. I mean, Cynthia's spoken about, her drug addiction and drug use. Marita and Carrie, maybe you can, sort of talk about when somebody comes into your care, is it often the case that they are, abusing drugs and using this to self-medicate?
This is a really, really, I can't stress the depth of this issue in our community specifically. So in Ottawa, we do not have, I was just in a meeting earlier today, we were talking about how we do not have a youth detox center here. We have various providers who can support youth with addictions. CHEO has some services, the ROH has some services, but if somebody needs to be in an inpatient unit because they have addictions, it doesn't exist. So if we're able to scrounge together money from different sources, we can maybe send them to Toronto. Otherwise, we're treating them as an outpatient in the community. And when these youth are being trafficked, they're maybe living on the street, they're living in group care, getting them into appointments to get their medications can be really difficult. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of providers don't have the sort of resources and knowledge to know how to treat these youth. And they have so much pain that they're dealing with on a daily basis, and they're actually doing a very good job on their own of treating their pain. And as I was listening to the two of you speak, I think about this a lot, and I tell the patients that I speak to this all the time. What you're doing to deal with your pain is you're doing the best you can. And whether those behaviors are self-harming, whether they're addictions, whether they're self-isolation, you're trying to take care of yourself. And when we shame people for addictions, when we use language like, oh, they're just behavioral, they're acting out, they're this and that, they're looking for attention, we're missing a really big part of the problem. And so letting them know what you're doing is you're trying to take care of yourself. Let's talk together about how we can take care of yourself in a different way with some better resources, and that's, I think, what Voice Found is doing.
And exactly, and just to add to that, when our clients do go for a treatment, like let's say for eating disorders, we know that most eating disorders are from early childhood sexual assault. They literally say, we don't deal with trauma, we just deal with the eating disorder. So they leave, they come back to me, the eating disorder revamps, because we haven't, so I'm very apprehensive to send anyone anywhere, because I really feel that we'll do a better job, within our own community to help people if they'll come within peer support, with, medication, finding a nutritionist, and of course the things that are covered are medication. So,
yeah.
Luckily we do our best job we can within our organization. We're so lucky to be funded, and you guys have some funding too. But I think that would be the big message. Let's push for better wraparound care, not just medication. Yeah, and when people are in these organizations like detox or, you know, eating disorder units, whatever, let's look into other things. Let's see if they can talk to someone about what's really the root of the problem.
Yeah, I just, like, how can we be missing this so badly, you know? That's what really bothers, I think, myself more than anything. Go ahead, Francois.
It's because we don't want to talk about it, right? Like, at the end of the day, nobody wants to associate children with sex, right? And it makes a lot of people's stomachs turn, right? So that's going to avoid, because like we spend so much time, and it's not just related to this, like within our society, avoidance is a big business, right? So all these coping mechanisms, all the alcohol, the addictions of every kind, shopping, gambling, even servicing, whatever that looks like, can serve as just another way to not feel whatever you're looking to not feel, right? And I think that's big business, and I think that's an important thing. And it's like acknowledging the behaviors around addictions and as a coping mechanism is really, really important to the other panelists' points. And it's also true of personality, right? So things like narcissism, things like borderline personality disorder, oftentimes will have a root in trauma. And this is just like ways for us to try and make sense at a very young age of something that makes no sense, right? And a big part of that needs to be explored, not just, and accepted within every single case that I come across, for sure.
I have a lot of clients that come to me, and they'll come to me because they're anxious or they have burnout at work or, you know, they've got OCD or all of these other things. And it can take people a long time. I've had people where, you know, they're seeing me bi-weekly for a year, and then they get there, and then they're comfortable enough to disclose, but they also tend to minimize it because they've had to minimize it their whole life. They couldn't accept that this thing that happened to them when they were a kid was that terrible, because then they'd have to face it, and it's not hard. You know, when somebody comes forward, if they're 4 or 64, 84, it is really, really hard. And I've had people in their 60s, and they come in, and I'm the first person they've told. And it took them a year to trust me, and, you know, safe space, therapy space, and I don't know, it's sad that we don't have more of these conversations so people feel like they can share.
Yeah, and knowing that it is going to take time, and it's okay that it takes whatever amount of time it takes. Carrie, it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
I just always think this. I used to work at a men's shelter, and the men would come in, and, you know, they were often abusers. And every single man was also abused. So I just think I would love to have services to break the cycle. We can't break the cycle with just helping victims. I think we really have to somehow reach out to them, give care, you know. And I had a CAS call today, and I'm like, God bless that man, because he's not doing well right now, you know. And in a youth jail, I worked with men, and there was no services, there was no support. And the first time, they didn't do that much crime. Second time they came back, they did. Third time, even more. And now they're going to adult jail. And I'm like, okay, we knew this when we discharged them. Where's the community supports? You know, where's the help for them so this doesn't escalate? Because they don't come from often parents that are super supportive. So I think that's a little bit of a missing link, and it's starting to be talked about. We've talked about it, but yeah, it just comes to mind.
Go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, just add to that. This is a gap that we found really significant with our children and youth that we saw. We know children are abused by adults, but what we don't know is, I think a lot of people don't know, is that often the abuse happens from younger people as well. So an older child or a teenager. And as you say, a lot of times that individual was also being abused as well. And what we found is that we could provide services for the individual that was abused, but if the older sibling hadn't disclosed or we didn't have their information, maybe it was a cousin and we have no contact with them because they're not our patient, there's nothing we can do. And even if we want to provide them services, there are very few therapists who specifically offer services for children who are enacting harm on other children. And so we did a lot of work looking within the province. We found a few people who were doing this work. In particular, one of them was a retired psychiatrist who, bless him, he would see some of our patients anyways, even though he was retired and sort of already doing 5 jobs. But it's a huge gap, and as you're both saying, it's contributing to the cycle. And we're picking up the bodies, as Desmond Tutu taught us, we're picking up the bodies out of the river without looking upstream to see where they're falling in.
Keith and Stacey, I never asked either of you this. Keith, did you have siblings growing up?
I have 2 brothers and a sister, and we've discussed it. If I go back a couple of steps, that was a hard disclosure with them because 2 out of the 3 are still staunch Catholics, and I didn't know what the response would be. Again, to their credit, they didn't disbelieve me. They're still staunch Catholics, which makes me a little crazy, but they didn't disbelieve. They somehow seem to be able to have a dividing line between what they believe in, for me, and what they believe in terms of the overall church. I do have siblings, and again, none of them report any. Though in hindsight, they said, "Oh yeah, that was a little strange." That
really, eh?
One of my brothers, I was an altar boy too, and that didn't happen to me. One of the things that really sticks with me, and they all remembered, was I got this super cool Mountie outfit, the full thing, the red, the hat, everything. I loved it, but why would the parish priest give me that? Like, why didn't someone say, "What the hell," right? Sort of thing, and they remember
and
that.
you're not going to think like that.
No.
Right? You're a kid. You're like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
And they remember, like, we were kind of ticked off that you got that cool, sort of thing. And nobody made the connection. But yeah, so again, I was lucky in that they do. They do believe me, but again, it kind of is a bit of a sticking point that they still go to church every Sunday.
I guess you have to respect that too.
Yeah,
right?
no,
I mean, it's not just the church is not the entire problem, right?
No, and you have to make concessions. Like, my brother-in-law passed away, and my sister asked if I would do the eulogy. And I don't go to church anymore, obviously.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't know. Like, if I have to sit through church, I don't know. As it turned out, I didn't really understand this, but the Catholic Church doesn't let you do the eulogy during the Mass. So if there's a eulogy by someone other than the priest, it has to be done before. So I said, perfect. I'll do the eulogy, and I'll see you later at the funeral home. Yeah. And so that's what I did. So yeah, you have to.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. State, did you have
I don't have siblings, but it was interesting because when I disclosed at about 17, I had an aunt who had always wondered why my grandfather kind of favored me over her kids, my cousins. And it's like, yeah, I wish he had not favored me. And I don't think she believes, and I don't know.
Really?
Yeah, and to this day, there's denial. It's her father, and I get that. That's the inner conflict. Even as, the person who has been abused, it's these people that we have loved and who have cared for us and have done things for us, but they're also doing these terrible things. And so, my grandfather would bring me to the library every 3 weeks, and he would take me canoeing, and he would buy me things, and I got allowance, and all these wonderful things. And like, the title of my book is Milk and Cookies, because that was the first grooming. He was babysitting me when my mom worked night shift, and I got to get out of bed and get milk and cookies. And that was a secret we had to keep, because you can't tell mom. But after that, it meant, well, which secrets can I keep and which ones do, I didn't want to give up the milk and cookies. At that point, I was 4. And then it continued. Well, I don't want to give up the allowance because, hey, I got more money than, all my friends. I was a kid. I didn't know what I was sacrificing.
That goes back to what we were talking about before. You're getting all these needs, right? Like safety and security and love and so forth. So, it's understandable that you were feeling in that moment each time. Rita, did you want to?
Yeah, as I'm listening to you both, and as Francois really clearly brought out how it's so entangled, right? It's not just all bad things that happened and you can somehow separate that. That attachment relationship is being developed in the context of the abuse. And as you were talking about sort of these complex feelings around the church and like this discomfort, and the challenges with family members that see things a little bit differently, I think it's very similar. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of deep spiritual abuse, and I don't think we talk about that a lot. And it sounds like it's mixed in, well, it is mixed in for a lot of people with the sexual abuse. And so I don't really have anything to say about that. I just want to name it and honor that and honor the complexities of having people we love that still are devoted to the church and maybe are devoted to us in some way. But there's this chasm between us where there's something that they just can't understand.
And I really want to jump in on this because I think that this is a really important piece, is that there's a lot of institutional abuse that can often accompany the abuse, right? So this idea that okay, yes, there's this individual that I trusted and that's one person, and often we love like focusing on that one person, but there's these entire organization and how organizations deal with that really start to like affect us. Well,
we've seen it in sports too, right? I mean, that's another excellent example. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that entanglement that we're talking about. Like what that does is it forces a child to make decisions, right? So it's like, how do I deal with the fact that these two things, my needs are being met and there's this violence that's occurring against me, right? And often what happens is this concept of splitting, right? So internally, we compartmentalize things. So we shove one thing in one corner and one thing in the other corner, right? And it starts to like really create divergence in an individual's personality, right? So, and that can happen like multiple times where there's like all these little sections of trying to understand. But one thematic that we find is self-loathing that you talked about in the onset, right? Because it's like, if this person who I love and trust is doing something bad, and I have to reconcile that at the age of 8, 9, 10, and I don't want him to be the bad guy, or I don't want her to be the bad person, right? So what do I do? What do I do with that? Well, it has to be me, right? Like, I have to be it. It's the only other person in this equation, as far as I can tell, right? And like that self-loathing is such a huge part of the experience of everybody that's part of this event. Right?
It's interesting, the self-loathing, because, when I was writing my story, the first part, people would think writing about the abuse would be the hard part. No problem. I knew that. I'm past that. The part where I had to write about my decisions and my actions that I call, the symptoms of my abuse. Those were things I did, and it's like, oh God, I was an awful person. I was terrible. How could I make those decisions? I didn't know any better. So that just feeds that self-loathing, and it can still creep in. I'll be honest, there are days where it's like, yeah, but you could have done better. I couldn't have. I didn't know how to do better. And I mean, being a therapist sometimes is great because I'm telling my clients this, because I can tell them, yeah, no, you did the best you could, and it's okay. And yet I'm saying it to myself as much as them.
Yeah, and I'm sure people, see the latest media report or, that comes out and talking about sexual exploitation, whether it's trafficking and so forth. Actually, we just talked about that a week ago, a huge investigation where over 300 charges, 64 people involved in Ontario and Western Quebec. 30 out of the 34 children have been identified so far. I want to talk about, because I think a lot of people dismiss it as, this is a one-off. Keith is, he's in a unique situation, and Stacy's in a unique situation. We're talking about individuals here, but there's also the human trafficking part of it. We live in Canada, and we just busted 64 people for child pornography, okay, a week ago. That's a drop in the bucket, right, Cynthia? because they know how to get away with it, and they know how to hide it really well. And that's why these investigations take months and sometimes years in order to get to the point. You imagine, I can't even imagine the investigators who understand what's going on, yet they still have to let it continue to a point. Imagine that. Continue to a point where now we can bust everybody. Can we talk about how common, Carrie, this is? And so we can just,
It's so tricky. Definitely my clients, at Voice Found, I have a few that have charged their trafficker. They're scared to death.
Yeah.
And there's not support for them to do this. So, like I said before, I have a few clients even this week that are like, what do you want me to do? Can you guarantee that I'm going to be safe? And these traffickers are smart. They're sending flowers to their parents. They're showing pictures of their dog, so it's like really sick, right? Like it's not a straightforward, you charge them, you're safe, they're going to jail. They're not going to jail that long, unfortunately. So it's a whole system issue. And it happens in, I think it was 2 blocks away from me, 2 of my clients were found. And I'm like, this wouldn't happen in my neighborhood. It does. Like, it happens all over Ottawa. Healthy families are shocked when, this boyfriend, all of a sudden, it's not always, usually it's someone that's older, that's grooming. My client today said, well, don't worry, I'm moving. He's not going to find me. I'm going to block him. And I'm like, okay, but they'll open their phone, right? Because they're filling needs still. They're still giving them, whether it's money, whether it's your, self-worth. So until that stops, and we can only treat that with, other resources, school, careers, community groups, something that makes them feel belonging to another group, then we can move on to, having the confidence to leave that situation.
Yeah, and just hearing you say all of that, it seems like our judicial system is failing the victims to a huge extent, right?
And you hear about the good judges. They're like, oh, she knows what trafficking is. So when the defense lawyer was saying, yeah, but you were drunk and, you let him on and you did all these things, the judge is actually going, yeah, that's just grooming. And she was exploited, and they get it. And, that's amazing, but it's one in, not many, unfortunately.
There's some numbers that are really scary. And 90% of youth that are human trafficked have been sexually abused as children. And the statistics show 1 in 3 women, 1 in 3 men, 1 in 5 men. I'm like, okay, so that's about a quarter of the population. Think about your local high school that's got about 2,000 students. 500 of them have been sexually abused or sexually exploited. That's one high school. When you kind of put numbers like that, it's like, this is really scary. This is something I don't care if it's a hard conversation, you've got to talk about it.
And that's not including all the online
boy.
abuse that's happening now. Yeah.
We don't have stats on that yet because we haven't had the time to study it because technology is advancing so quickly.
Go ahead, Marita. Yeah, I think you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I think the way that you were explaining that vulnerability that starts in the sort of first abuse and then is just preparing the ground for somebody else. We see so many youth who, the hard part is not getting in front of a judge. The hard part is actually getting the youth to actually acknowledge what's happened and understand what's happening, and then also having a better alternative. Because quite frankly, for somebody that's living on the street, that has nowhere to go, or living in group care, that they're potentially being abused or something, bullying or other things are happening, we don't have a better option for them. And so if somebody offers them a place to live, they offer them money, they offer them food and shelter and protection, we can't offer them something better, we can't help them, right? They're not going to come to us. And so I've had very honest conversations with some very articulate, smart young people, and they are perfectly aware that they're gonna have their phone taken away if they go into an inpatient unit. They have been in inpatient units before or in group care before, and they don't wanna go back there. So I think one of the big messages just for all of us who want to support is, I think you mentioned it earlier, Carrie, that just building those trusting relationships and building those relationships with the young people where they can come and talk to us about something, because young people are looking for belonging, right? This is a basic attachment need that children and youth need, is belonging and safety. And building those things in our community and building supports within the community, brothers and sisters, organizations like that, this is where we can stop things from happening way back. Because once somebody is in it, it takes so many different resources and so much time to get them out.
I know it's a really heavy conversation, and we've talked about a lot of the negative, but in the last 10 or 15 minutes, I want to talk about the positives, because there are positives that are happening through organizations like Voice Found, from people like Stacey and Keith, who have decided to share their story. So let's go, down the line here, and just, because, I mean, Stacey, when you were on the show just the other day, you said, I've got a loving husband, and I mean, you still live with this trauma, but you're a great example of someone who's come through it, and you're thriving, and life is good, right?
It is good. Like, I look at all this stuff that's happened, and I said, but it's brought me to where I am today. And I have a good life, and I'm happy, and I would never want to, like, if I could choose a different path to get here, I would, but I'm okay with where I am. So if this is what has given me the opportunity to help others, it's okay that it happened, and that's part of that acceptance. We're grieving the childhood we wish we had. We're grieving, all those things that we see on TV or in media and we think is perfect, and life can get better. You can heal. The chronic condition can be managed very, very well. And I think, Keith is a good example, Francois, myself. You can get through this. And yes, it's going to creep up now and then. It doesn't disappear, but you can manage it and be okay.
I just want to jump in for a second, because something that Stacey just mentioned is social media, and I think sometimes that fools all of us into thinking that I'm not going to share my trauma, or I'm not going to discuss what's going on in my life, because everybody's life is perfect. Social media is the greatest place in the world for all of us to show everybody how fantastic we are and how great life is. We don't share what's bad on social media for the most part. So just keep that in mind. If you're struggling and you're looking around and you see that, no one's suffering like yourself, everybody, like almost everybody, is suffering from some bit of trauma. Social media is absolutely fake. And there's some great people to follow, don't get me wrong, that share. I've shared my own story on social media, but I'm just saying, I don't want you walking away here without taking away something. And from me personally, I hope you take that away. Don't worry. Everybody else has got their issues. Social media is pretend a lot of the time.
Alone.
Yeah. Marita, do you want to touch on something? Let's leave these people with something positive, shall we?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that gives me hope is that you're all here today, right? You all showed up to listen to a really difficult conversation. And the other thing that gives me hope is that I've been working in this field for almost 10 years, and almost everybody that I work with, not everybody, but most of the people who are doing really big work in this area are people who've had this experience themselves and have suffered themselves. And they have alchemized their pain and their suffering and transformed it into this fierce fight so that other people don't have to experience what they experienced. And that's what drives me. That's what gives me so much hope, because there is so many people and so many beautiful things happening. We just need to shine a light on it.
Encouraging words, absolutely. Go ahead, Carrie.
And just, this is so important to get the word out because it trickles down to different organizations. I have a client that is 25. She had chronic pain for their whole life. You know, and I did every test under man, and I, you know, found a few things that were off, and I was like, oh, maybe this warrants a referral, because you're always looking for something physical, even though we know trauma does lead to a lot of autoimmune things. So we found this rheumatologist, and the rheumatologist was so wonderful because she had knowledge about trauma. She was like, if it's not now, it could happen, so we want to prevent. So she gave her so much, you know, empowerment, and this client went back every 6 months until finally she's like, you know what? I just know, let's try something. So she tried this medication, and the client came in last week, and I haven't heard this in 3 years. She's like, I have zero pain. And I was like, oh my God, yes. You know,
Nice.
So, you know, I think the more that different organizations, different physicians, you know, specialists know about the effects of trauma and how to prevent it, how we can, you know, prevent that cascade of health conditions from happening, I think we'll come ahead for
Yeah,
sure.
there's definitely missing links that can certainly be linked quite easily if we
Oh,
put
yes.
more effort into it, right? Keith?
Something that Stacy said, you know, we are what we are, and this is part of who we are. And my therapist was really good at making that point for me. She would say, you're so resilient. And I would say, well, okay, great. And she'd say, well, think about what you've done with your life. You know, you were a partner in a law firm. You became a city councilor 3 times over. She said, maybe you wouldn't have been able to do all these things without that sense of resilience. And I was talking to Kristen about it, especially when I was having, you know, more difficult days in therapy. And she said, well, I'm not sure I'd say resilient. She said, I'd say tenacious. And she said, you know, I apologize for what I'm about to say. She says, you're a tenacious little fucker. And so that became what the family would call me. And it became my brand, literally. Kristen came up with the name. My son, who's an artist, designed a TLF, and I went off to a tattoo artist. So it's right on my arm.
Nice.
You know, so Stacy's quite right. It becomes part of you, and then it becomes a question. And I say only in part because everybody has to deal with it differently, and everybody's impacted differently. But if you can find a way to, I don't know if accept is the right way, Stacy, but you know, it's part of your life, but it's not your whole life. You still have control over your life. It takes a while to get there, and some people unfortunately never make it that far. But it is part of you, and it becomes. I literally put it on me, you know, I have a great life. I have a wonderful life, and with my family and the things that I've been able to achieve. So, yeah, don't give up hope.
Well said, Keith. Francois?
Yeah, and you know, like it's such a unique journey for everybody. And I remember, you know, when we talk about like disclosures and awkward disclosures, I remember being in my 20s and suffering from ED and like having these like whatever these encounters and like trying to explain this. Oh, it's not you, it's me, and it's like but I can't tell you why, and all this stuff is happening, right? And like man, like talk about something that's like embarrassing to talk about, right? And as a bit of a shout out to the Strength Found program, I'll never forget, and a bit of a spoiler alert for anybody who might be partaking, is that there's this great week that speaks to the inner child experience, right? And it was such a potent experience on my end, reconnecting with that. And, you know, like that self-loathing that prevents you from, acceptance is tough, self-love is tough, right? And often I'm working with clients about just establishing a bond, like just accepting that there is an inner child inside of you, right? And we go through this exercise with a meditation and a reconnection with your inner child. And I walked away from that and I felt this energy that I hadn't felt in forever. And I literally skipped around my kitchen. It's just not me. Like, I'm a pretty serious person.
I could see you as a skipper, Francois. Come on.
As I am today, but not as I was back then, right? So, and in that instance, that difficulty disappeared, and it was able to lead to a more fulfilling sex life and a more fulfilling life overall, and deeper connections and connection to self. And I would have never done that work without all of this. And there's so many people who do not suffer in the same way in terms of trauma that never get the chance to do that introspection to really clean up what's happening inside of them. And I think it's a curse and a treasure all at the same time to be able to have that flashlight, that spotlight, to be able to take a look at who you are and how you're built and see if there's changes that you want to make.
Well, thank you all for sharing your perspectives. I'll leave it with this, and I say this often to people, is that, I don't know, it's a human condition that we have, that we can't celebrate our accomplishments, right? We're supposed to be humble, and we're supposed to let everybody else celebrate our accomplishments. I encourage you to celebrate your accomplishments. It depends on the way you go about doing it, right? If you look at people that come across as arrogant, well, they're not necessarily celebrating an accomplishment, right? They're patting themselves on the back, and they're trying to boost themselves up above others. But you hear these stories that you heard today. They have accomplished so many things, right? Just being here is a huge accomplishment. So no matter how small the accomplishment is, we're really hard on ourselves. Don't be so hard on yourself. Celebrate the little things, Give yourself a pat on the back. You're allowed to do that. Thanks for having me here. I can't tell you how much I'm honored to be part of Voice Found and doing these panels. So I really appreciate your time. And thanks to all of these. How about a big hand to this great panel?
Wow, thank you. I have a lot of thank yous to say and a little bit of a wrap up. We do have some time for a Q&A if we'd like to do some questions and answers for about maybe 10 minutes. But first of all, I do know that Derek has to leave, unfortunately. I'm being very mindful of your time. Okay. And before he goes, as he sneaks out, I do want to once again thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. He does such a great job, right? It makes so approachable, and you know how I feel. I get all weepy here. Okay. Talk to you soon. So I think the acoustics are such that, well, how about this? If you have a question, raise your hand. I'll run over with the mic and ask away. How does that work? Sound good? Somebody will have to share a mic. Who has a question? Okay.
Thank you. So asking for myself and my daughter, how do you find a therapist? One is she's concerned with money, so I'm not covered by insurance. And so I guess it's twofold. How do you find a therapist? And what kind of therapy do you look for? And how do you know?
If money's an issue, definitely contact Voice Found. We've got great programs. That's a good start. Locally, I often advise people to go to psychologytoday.com, and you can filter by like Ottawa or Canada or Stittsville or Orleans and all the different neighborhoods, and read through the profiles, and kind of, you can filter for different specialties. But then, there's a contact page with phone numbers, and you can do like an email kind of through the page, and talk to several. And kind of interview them and see who you click with, because not everybody is going to be a good fit. And that's the most important success indicator, is the rapport you have with your therapist. It's not which therapy type they use, it's if you've got rapport. And so you want to find, and if you do a few sessions with somebody and you're like, yeah, this isn't working, find somebody else. Ask your therapist for. I tell my clients that all the time. I'm like, you know what? If it doesn't work with me, that's okay. I want to make sure you get the care you need. So I'll help, especially now if I've talked to you for an hour or two, I might know somebody who'd be a perfect fit for you. And ask about sliding scale. I mean, I know myself, I do a lot of sliding scale or even a few pro bonos all the time. It might be hard to find, but there's also family services. There's a lot of programs, and I think you guys would be able to address that.
So St. Paul definitely offers a sliding scale. I actually have a couple of my supervisees that are graduated from St. Paul's, yeah, I think that you can get as low as $5 a session sometimes, and things like that within the community. So, I would also add that it's depth work, right? So work with trauma. Anything that goes beyond, you'll see very often these things around CBT or DBT, but if you can go a little bit deeper and somebody talks about something more trauma focused, I think those are the things I would look for on profiles on Psychology Today.
And the organizations too, I did therapy years ago with the Jewish Family Services. I'm not Jewish, you don't have to be. And I had a client who had come from there who was paying $10 a session. There might be a waiting list. Also, your local community resource centers. There's Western Ottawa Community Resource Center, and call 311. They'll direct you to the right one for your area.
Sure. My name is Ashley Kay. I'm a nurse. I work on First Nation reserves in Northern Ontario. I'm thinking a lot about community. I think, Cynthia, at the beginning you made some really thought-provoking remarks that have resonated with me, and I think I'm wondering, from all of your perspectives, so much of the hurt and the healing happens in community, and our resources, I even think of myself in the work that I do, our resources feel so trapped within the walls of these institutions. So I'm wondering, I think from your perspectives, how, on one hand, what's happening in the community from your perspectives that's really helping us get better as a community, and what are things that you see could also be resources that we could see more of in the community?
By community, you mean Ottawa, mostly? Okay. I think Cynthia does a really good job at, and maybe the HC community, at joining forces. So we're not reinventing the wheel, but also not thinking we're better than anyone else. So, what services do you have? Okay, let's combine. So I think just that communication between all the organizations is so important. And sometimes, you can start these conversations, right? And if it's something direct to, the needs of some of your members, you could pull in all those people and get a good, kind of community group going. It can definitely be ground up. It doesn't have to be, government-funded stuff all the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I found it really helpful when I was in the role at the hospital working with the sexual assault care program. It was so helpful for me to just meet somebody at an event like this and say, oh, hey, can I grab your email? Let's chat, because you have a service and I sometimes need help with this and you sometimes need help with that. And even just really informal meetings and building those community connections is so powerful. Like she says, it doesn't have to be at the level of an official table, although those do exist and that's really helpful. But just those grassroots connections can be really helpful.
I also want to add that we're probably at the greatest time in human history when it comes to talking about mental health, right? And it doesn't stop here. The advocacy work, how you vote, how you decide to direct your funds, which organizations you support, all those things have an impact that says, hey, this is important, and this is stuff that circles back eventually. I truly wish that all of my psychotherapy services were covered by OHIP, and they're not. We're making small gains. At least they're cutting GST, things like that, HST off of these big. And we're starting these conversations. But the more we speak, the more we talk about this, the more we talk about our successes in this, the more the money tends to follow. So.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank the panel for the courage to share a little bit about their experiences. I'm a new therapist, and Stacy, my question is more for you. How was it, because because coming off, like after graduating, we have this image of, as a therapist, you have to be a certain way. And I struggle with the need to share my story and certain trauma that I've experienced. I am from Rwanda in Africa, so there's a lot of things that I have witnessed. But I'm like, how is it gonna affect my profession and the idea of a therapist? And I don't know if you can share with us a little bit of like the impact it did. You wrote a book about your trauma, and how did it impact your profession?
I really struggled with that because I was worried, because a lot of therapists and what we're taught are like, there's no self-disclosure. And then as I got into the field and got to know people, I'm like, oh wait, no, there is self-disclosure. And one of the important things I remember hearing was, what's the purpose of your self-disclosure with the client? Is it because you're trying to get something off your chest, and is it for you, or is it for the client's benefit? I'm probably one of the therapists that does disclose more than the average. I don't get into nitty-gritty details, but it has really helped build some of that rapport, and I think why some of the people have been comfortable to get a little bit more detailed in what they tell me. So, you've got to find your balance of what you're comfortable sharing and how much. With the book, my clients, if they Google me, they're probably going to see it. I've had a few say, oh, I want to read it. And I'm like, are you sure you want to read it? Do you want to know that much about your therapist? If you do, that's fine. I have no problem with it. Even my own therapist, he was there through part of that journey, and he's like, do you want me to read it? I'm like, sure. There's nothing in there that I probably haven't told him. But, you have to decide what you're comfortable with. But obviously from the professional standpoint, when you're talking to them, it's got to benefit them.
Yeah. And I think Francois brought this up one day in our supervision, that you don't want them to feel like they have to take care of you. So that was such a good point, because, we disclose and we connect. And then, one time I remember my client disclosed and I got teary. And she's like, are you okay? I'm like, yep, I'm fine. Like, this isn't about me, So you just have to, and then if that happens, you just be honest. You be like, you know what, we're humans. We're here to help each other, and come back. And I book them even quicker back if something happened, But that was a really good point he made.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that as long as something's coming from this caretaking, loving, community building space, those are pretty good ingredients to throw into the oven, right? So you can trust what comes back of that. So the intent matters at the end of the day. And as long as it's not about you and you're not making it about you, I think that's for that sole purpose. I think that's the key piece there.
Hi. Is this on? I just want to say thank you so much for being so open and sharing so much with us, all of you. It's very helpful. I'm a young teacher. I'm also a survivor, and I'm just at the beginning of my journey after coming forward a few years ago. And I guess, I see Stacy and I see Keith with, wedding rings on your fingers and talking about your family and your spouses, and I just wonder, how you've navigated relationships, because it's something I've struggled with a lot.
It hasn't been easy. There certainly have been times where, prior to me knowing, one of my symptoms was I was an angry guy. Not to the point where I ever was physical or anything like that, but I was difficult to be around. And, frankly, there are times I wonder why Kristen stayed around. And she keeps on saying to me, I made a promise. I can only speak to my relationship, my primary relationship. I think that I've hit the jackpot, won the lottery, and everything else all rolled into one. I couldn't ask for someone who's been more supportive and more tough on me sometimes. The whole tenacious little thing was because I was having trouble with the therapy process. I wasn't sure I could keep going back, and she said, you're a tenacious little fucker and you're going back. which was exactly the right thing. So I can only speak to my relationship, but I think if you find the right person, they will understand, and they will help you navigate. And if they don't, then maybe they're not the right person.
I also think that, like finding any relationship, there's a little bit of luck. I had a significant relationship, and I had 2 children, and that was not a good, healthy relationship, and it didn't work, surprise, surprise. And then I had some shorter ones that were kind of not great, and I met my husband, and it just clicked. And it has been hard as hell. And, he has been patient, but he's also not been perfect all the time, and he didn't understand it. I think a big part of it is figuring out your own stuff and kind of that self-awareness, and I'm still doing it. Learn your boundaries. Boundaries, what's okay, what's not okay. And if that person can't respect that, maybe they're not the match for you. Have a conversation around why they can't match with your boundary, because maybe your boundary is something you want to look at again and say, oh, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm not being reasonable and I need to rethink this. But the right people are out there for you, and there are a lot of good people. But you work on yourself.
To this, because learning about how you are as a relatable being is really important, right? And it's also important to understand relationship not as this like checkpoint of like success in life, right? Like being this good, loving person and knowing how to be vulnerable, knowing how to trust, how to integrate all those things, like that can happen within a relationship. And we're all in relationships all the time, all over the place, right? Whether it be a therapeutic relationship or with a boss or with coworkers and all that stuff. And I think there's such power about letting go of this like achievement piece and just developing yourself within that. And we talked a lot about self-love, self-acceptance, all these things as thematics, and that relationship to self is the only relationship you're actually going to have for the rest of your life, right? So that's the most important one that you want to work on.
I'll just add one thing while you're finding the next question. Everything that Francois said, yes, mind blank. Everything that you said, but also build yourself a community of other people who are survivors, and build those beautiful, close relationships with people who fully see you. Because if you know what that feels like with friends, with family, to be seen and known, you'll know what to look for.
We're done? Okay, there we go. We are going to bring this to a close, but before we do, I have a few things that I wanted to mention. Sorry, Stacy. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. I love that last minute handing of things. It's great. So before we go, I do have a few ending notes. Once again, huge thank you to wonderful participants on our panel. I always learn, even though this has been my experience since I was 5, you still learn, and you always learn, and it's great to have this community. We are going to be developing, so keep your eyes open, childhood sexual abuse prevention training. We've delivered it before for many years, and I worked up north in Nunavut and developed training for the north. It's something that we're really lacking, is a very clear, here is what to do if a child discloses and everything like that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be working actually with one of the people on our panel, and we're going to put together training that will be available on our website, and it'll be free. Because why do we need people to pay for this? I want people to be able to prevent this from happening. I'm not going to give you a timeline, but with your permission, I have everyone's email address. If any of you don't want to get notices from us, just send a note and say, just leave me alone. I won't be offended. I really won't. So there's that coming up. You'll notice we have put some envelopes on the table. This is not a fundraising event, but I do want to mention that some of the services that we're providing and what have been talked about here, we have the first ever nurse practitioner-led health clinic that works specifically with people who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, exploitation, and human trafficking. We could have that thing open like 7 days a week. We are funded by the province. It's enough, but not enough, right? So we really want to expand that. All of our services, in fact, because we help break down barriers. I don't ever want healing to just be for the privileged. It has to be available to everybody. And we work with men, we work with women, we work with, I don't care what you are. We're happy to help. But of course, some people do need traditional therapy that we will help support, but only for as much as the money allows us to. So just throwing it out there. And then the other thing is, for the next little while before we go, someone has a bag of tickets. Apparently I'm doing a draw. Are you doing a draw? Who's doing a draw? Right? Okay. But hang on just a sec. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm all over. I need to do one more thing before I do a draw. Food. There's so much darn food over there. I want everybody leaving here with sandwiches. I don't want to see any food. Okay, maybe save a couple, our team. But please take it. I mean, and that was all Chef Rick from the mission, the Ottawa mission, who, yeah. They do a great job, and we are always happy to support their work. And the cupcakes are Hope Cakes Bakery. And again, this is somebody we know very, very well who has started this little enterprise, and she's quite an amazing young woman. So we're really grateful and thank her. And okay, now talk about this draw.
So when we were promoting this, I reached out to Dylan Black from Boom 99.7, and he gave us a gift certificate. And it was, after such a heavy topic, it might be nice to have something a little lighter. So we're doing a draw for a $250 gift certificate for Yuck Yucks. So,
I'm stirring them up. Play on words. I think there's people here from Stir It Up Collective. Is this what you mean? Stir it up, stir it up. Okay, I think I stirred it up well enough here. All right, everybody got your ticket? The number is 24209. Do we have a winner? We know where to find you. We will be sure to send your... So it wasn't set up. You saw me. Jean is one of my dear, I have the best team. I truly do. Jean looks after finance at Voice Found, which everybody will tell you, I kind of understand all the budget, but, all those putting the numbers in the right columns and that's his expertise, and he keeps me sane. We're in the middle of our annual audit right now. So I'm very grateful to Jean. Really, that is all I have. I know Stacy brought some of her books with her. If you're interested, we haven't set them up, but we can put them out by the table or somewhere. If anybody would like, if you want to give a small donation for a book. How does that sound? That sounds great to me. All right, so that's it. Please, more food. We're going to be at, I know you say it again. I'm going to watch everybody at the door. Do you have food? I really, really look forward to doing more of these talks and conversations. I think they're super important. We'll be spreading the word. We're going to do a whole lot more of this type of thing. And once again, my sincere gratitude. It means so much, because I will tell you, when I started doing this work, and I have a picture of it to remind me of how far we've come. I was invited to an event, and I set everything up. It was all volunteer. This is going back about 14 years ago. And I showed up at the event because it was for parents. And surely they want to know how to keep their kids safe, right? I have a picture of me and all of my things and an empty room. And I will tell you, I had no said to me more times than you can ever imagine. People didn't want to hear about it. People didn't want to do anything about it. No, it's not a mental health issue. No, it's not, right? So I think I could get a tattoo. I don't want to steal his brand, but something along that line. But any of us in this room, anybody can be an advocate, anybody can be an ally. Everybody has the opportunity to do something, and if you care enough about it, you just find a way to do it, and you just keep going. I am now grateful to have the best team. I will say it again. Our team is exceptional at the work they do and have big hearts, and thank you all for being here. That's it.